So the next speaker on our agenda is Heather Villanueva. Heather and I know Heather's father. we're friends. But she's a senior community strength organizer for LCIU 775 and the co-lead of the racial equity team, a women and people of color-led group of advocates, leaders, and lobbyists working to advance racial justice in state policy. So tonight, her main topic is Real ID. And I'm surprised when I talk to our members, hardly anybody knows about it. So, and it has really bad impact on a lot of people. That's all, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for letting me be here again. My name is Heather Villanueva. I work at SEIU 775 as a community strength organizer. We represent home care workers, long-term care workers, and also the co-lead of the racial equity team, which, as Uncle Rick was saying, is a women of color and people of color, women of color-led group of advocates, leaders, and lobbyists that are really working every day down in Olympia to make sure that voices of communities of color and the interests of communities of color are being reflected in all the negotiations that are happening down there. So the Real ID is a really interesting issue. This is one that we're really paying a lot of attention to. So just a little bit of background. Kind of in the post 9/11 hysteria, the federal government passed a law called the Real ID Act, and this put in place standards for Washington, or for driver's license around the states. A lot of states found these requirements problematic because some of them had issues with privacy, had issues with regards to civil rights and justice. Actually, a lot of states are not in compliance. I believe there might be 20 states that do not have driver's licenses that are in compliance with Real ID. Well, Washington State is one of the states that is not compliant because our legislature actually had a bipartisan effort and passed a law that said we will not comply with Real ID. It's taking state resources, it's discriminatory, we're not going to stand for this. But the federal government right now is kind of going after us and a couple other folks and saying, Washington State, you need to be compliant, you need to be compliant right now, you need to be compliant as of January something or other. And what they're going to do if we're not compliant is that people will not be able to enter certain federal buildings if they don't have an ID that's compliant, and in the future, no sooner than 2016, people will actually not be able to board commercial airlines if they don't have a Real ID compliant ID. So one of the things that's the most problematic about the Real ID is that you actually need to be, hold on, let me take a step back. So Governor Inslee is getting this pressure from the federal government saying you need to comply with Real ID, and started working with the Department of Licensing on a potential bill that was not introduced this year, but I think we still need to watch out for it. That's basically authorizing Washington State Department of Licensing to put a stamp on your ID that says this ID is not valid for federal purposes. And it would be pushing people to get what we have now, which is an enhanced driver's license that happens to be compliant. In order to get an enhanced ID, you have to pay a little bit more, and you have to be a citizen of the United States. So the people that are being left out, that would be left out if this is the system that we go to, are people who are non-citizens and people who maybe don't have access to all the documents, which could include people who are low income and seniors. So this is going to have a really big impact and would have a really, really huge impact, especially on the 11th legislative district, where we have, really amazing diversity, really great thriving immigrant communities, right? So the governor did not want to do this necessarily, but was feeling the pressure, and so advocates have been working really hard to make sure that we sort of slow this process down, that we try to figure out a system that's going to be equitable for everyone. So I'm actually going to pass this letter around. This is a sign-on letter from different communities that's saying, you know, we don't think that we should give in to being compliant with Real ID. Washington State has worked very hard to ensure that driver's licenses are accessible to all people who are driving in Washington, and that all people should have access to ID, because ID gives you things like access to a bank account and other things that are just very basic, right? Think of all the things you need in a vehicle. So that is sort of the gist of Real ID. Where we're at now, like I said, the bill was not introduced this year, which is a good thing. But we do really need to watch out for it and keep that visa and saying that we're, you know, that we don't want Real ID. Possibly talk to other states and see what they're going to be doing. I'm really working really hard. It could, you know, we could have to have a really rapid response when it comes to this issue. So, you know, it'd be really great if folks just sort of start to have conversations about this and talk about, you know, how we might be able to work together. So I'll take a couple questions on Real ID now, because it's a really dense issue.
Real ID goes against Washington's inclusive values and discriminates against low-income people, senior citizens, and non-citizens. Why is that?
Okay, so there's a number of requirements to get that states have to meet in order to have a Real ID. One of them is a proof of legal presence. That they're saying that if you're going to get an ID that's valid for federal purposes, that will let you into federal buildings, that will let you onto a commercial airline, you need to provide proof of legal presence in this country. And additionally, if you're going to get an ID that's compliant with all these things, the cost is higher, right? So that cost is actually passed down to, you know, just individual people. So not only is it locking out people that who are undocumented, or people that just don't have their documents lined up, maybe can't access it because it's been years, or their documents are in another place or another country or burned in a fire, you know, or people who just don't have money to go and pay that extra fee, because people are really struggling right now on a shoestring. So that's the ways that it really is going to impact all those different groups.
Emily.
I happen to have a copy of my birth certificate. But I am aware that there are a number of facilities where these kinds of things have been stored that have burned, and the documents no longer exist. So what is in this potential, like this law, you know, that says, well, too bad. I mean, what happens if your birth certificate, which you never needed, you know, before, right, is no longer extant? What do they provide for you to do instead?
Right. Well, I can't defend the federal law because I am not a
No, I'm not asking
So,
you to defend the
right.
federal law. I'm just saying,
yeah.
do they even recognize the fact that some of these documents no longer exist? Or my father was born in this country, he never had a birth certificate. He had a little thing that said, yes, he was born alive on such and such a date. But it was, you know, witnessed maybe by people who are no longer alive.
Right.
But I mean, people are used to things the way that they are now, and they weren't always, and some of those things disappear. So what has the federal government got in place that you can use if the things that they want you to have don't exist?
Right. That's the exact problem with this legislation, is that
They don't have anything?
well, I can't tell you what provisions they have made for that kind of situation, but it's going to make it that much more difficult for people that are in that situation. So, you know, folks whose documents burned up, or folks who never had them in the first place, you know, this is going to create a problem for all those people. It's unclear how those folks would be able to access federal buildings and commercial airlines if they're in that position, if they're not able to meet the standards, the very high standards that the federal government is imposing for our driver's licenses.
Jim, then Matt.
I just wonder how this will affect people with existing passport cards.
So the enhanced ID that we have now that you can use in order to get into Canada or I believe Mexico, those are fine. Those are compliant right now. So people who have those are going to be totally fine. Anyone who can't get that, who either is going to have a hard time paying for it, have a hard time finding the documents to prove that they're a citizen, all those things are kind of left out to hang.
And that's what this is for, then, is for
Yeah, massive.
Another category would be refugees who have no access to it. But an irony that I became aware of Sunday night on 60 Minutes was the government has an official list of people who are dead, but aren't really dead. And the possibility of getting undead, if you're on that list, is extremely difficult. So it seems like there's an irony that they want to do this, and yet there's that other problem floating around at a very high level, Social Security and beyond probably. It sounds like somebody has gone off, again, half-cocked, kind of like the whole, national security law. They need to get their act together before they put expectations on states who are doing a job that has worked for, not perfect, but for a long time. That's an irony. That's an irony. Another irony they need to fix.
Absolutely. The Department of Licensing in Washington State, our ID is really great, actually.
Yeah.
We have our requirement is that people are residents of the state. There are very serious, things that you have to meet to prove that you're a resident of the state. And all these, and we've also, made a lot of protections when it comes to LGBTQ folks and stuff like that. Everyone has access to ID, and everyone who's driving on the roads has a license to drive on the roads. It's a public safety issue that everyone has it. It's a fairness issue that everybody has access to ID. So, I'm with you.
Well, and there's another thing coming in at an oblique angle, and that is the voting rights laws are really complicated by this. And the people who are disadvantaged, just kind of out of hand, are really kind of getting it in the ear as far as difficulty getting okay voting credentials.
Right, which raises a great issue. We really need to make sure that in all the advocacy that we're doing, we're making sure that our work is very inclusive, that we're being very diverse, that we're bringing in people of color,
Yep.
that we're bringing in youth, that we're bringing in women to be women. Folks think that just because our nation is becoming more diverse, that magically we're going to live in some sort of progressive utopia or democratic utopia where everyone is going to be fair. But what we have to really look and pay attention to is that power is going to remain with those in power now if we don't actually uplift the voices and diversify and try and address those issues that are disproportionately hurting poor people, people of color, people low income, seniors, people with disabilities, etc. So, absolutely. I think my time might be up. I don't know.
I have one quick question, and that is, we're starting to hear more and more about fraud against immigrants, where people are being approached and, hey, I'll do all your paperwork, they take the money and they run. What I'd like to know, I'll figure it out one way or another, but if you know it, who do we contact if we see someone doing that, or if we know a victim of that kind of activity?
Oh, that's a really good question. I usually go to my friends over at Northwest Immigrant Rights Project for referrals like that. Yeah, Rewa might know folks. A lot of the immigrant rights organizations in America and things like that can sort of refer us to the people to catch those notarios, as they're called, or taking advantage of.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I'll leave you with one more thing, and this is just our general racial equity team watch list. So, like I said, the racial equity team works on a lot of issues that have to do with racial justice. And so what I'm passing around is a list of legislation that we're watching that is going to have an impact on people of color, either positive or negative. So if you want to know a little bit more about any of these things, you can either get my contact information from Uncle Rick, or you could actually email these people directly that are looking at contact.
Are these things that are still alive?
those are things that are still alive.
Thank you. Heather. So that's